Hey, everybody, and welcome to Your Next. I'm your host, Jerome Myers, and you are in for a treat today. I got the pleasure of getting an advanced copy of Hip Hop and Finance from my newest friend, Drew Boyer. And when I tell you, this is one of the most interesting reads that I've had in the past 12 months, whether it's just the beauty of the way that they've laid out the book from the images on the inside to the lyrics from some of the most iconic hip hop songs, some of the charts and tables that are in here, man. I tell you, it's a different approach to something that's pretty boring in general and usually just restrictive. I mean, Drew brings things to life in this book that, in a way, that I've not seen anybody else do. And so when we were chatting on LinkedIn, I said, "Hey, man, why don't we come and launch the book on the podcast?" And he said, "Sure," which is what was a great honor for me. So here we are today talking about hip hop and finance with my man, Drew. Drew, what's going on, man? How are you?
Hey, Jerome, thanks for having me on. And I think I said absolutely when you asked me. I'd love to get on here with you.
Well, you got to find out what's going on. And so talk to me, Drew. What's the inspiration behind the book?
Yeah, so most people that know me personally know that I was a drummer before I had to grow up and get a day job. But a lot of my clients didn't know that before I started writing. And so somebody gave the 6-year-old or sixth grader of myself a couple drumsticks, and I was able to sit down and just play. And I've been in love with music ever since, all kinds. So jazz, blues, R&B, hip hop, rock. I play almost everything. I can hear it and just do it. And so I had originally played all through high school. Got to go to Ohio State for college and got into a couple bands there and got to do a little bit of touring. And then after school got out, I had some buddies that went up to Brooklyn. And so I was able to play up there for about a year and a half off and on. And I got to do my thing, but eventually like, hey, this is what pays the bills. And so getting 20 plus years into this, I wanted to do something to give back. And I didn't quite know what that was, but I feel like call it the universe or whatever speaking through me, like you should write and you need to take something that's so public, like music, that's something we all share, and take that with money, which is a really personal thing. It's private, like it's personal, and try to show what mistakes I made. Here's what I did wrong. Yes, I'm a financial advisor. I made mistakes. Everybody makes mistakes, but it's your decision to make it better and get out of it and work forward to what the future that you want to get to. And a lot of times I look around and we're in a celebrity obsessed culture. I get it. My wife is from overseas, so I see that their news is all US news. And a lot of people are looking upon what we're putting out. But I said, if we can get rid of the acronyms that are like in every profession, but especially in finance, I'd ask my wife, what does IRA stand for? Individual retirement account. But she's like, internal revenue. I'm like, no, it's a different one. But if you get rid of the acronyms and put in some really, really great big personalities that you've heard of before, and you start explaining the money behind the music, you can draw people in to learn about personal finance. I think it's a little bit more accessible that way. And so that was the inspiration of blending the two. As far as picking up on hip hop, I mean, I was really thinking about when I wanted to go on the journey of writing something. Hip hop was the biggest thing that hit me upside the forehead when I was in 8th grade and I was trying to shoot hoops, and it didn't go far, but I was listening to Criss Cross and Arrested Development and Tribe Called Quest right here. But there's a moment where I found out that money means something, but words mean something. Words have power. And there's a story in the book about we would save our chore money up, and I'm assuming for a similar age, you go to the mall, go into like a Sam Goody store or something. And I learned to look for the good stuff. It had the parental advisor sticker on it, which is why it's on the book, right here. And you go up there like Two Life Crew, NWA. I shouldn't be looking at this, but I was able to buy it. And the record I got was Sir Mix-a-Lot, and it was Baby Got Back. And the first time I heard that song on the radio, I'm like, it's like, oh my God, Beckett. And I'm like, what is this? What is this? And so I knew from that moment I had to go buy it. And so I went in and bought it. And my mom's like, what'd you get? So I'm like, nothing you're going to want to hear. And she said, put it in. And it popped out really fast. And I grew up in a very conservative Christian household. It was their house, their rules, but that thing got smashed when I got home. It's crazy. And my money lesson for that is that if you're going to invest in something, make sure it works more than one time, right? I had to go back and buy the same cassette next week. I just didn't tell them this time. You're welcome, Sir Mix-a-Lot.
Literally got smashed. I mean, I remember that story from reading the book, and I didn't know if you were going to actually go that deep because that
Sledgehammer.
Yeah, I mean,
Statement.
They made a statement out of it, an example of what is not acceptable here, which I think for most teenagers just creates more rebellion. It's a parenting tip. But so you touched on something that I think many people don't actually have conversations about. And it's the shame of not knowing when it comes to finance. You have money, you pick up whatever was around the kitchen table. And if you lived in scarcity, like a lot of folks that I know, you tend to continue that. You continue to expect that. And when you start getting around some people who do something different, many times we're uncomfortable asking questions about it because we don't want to let them know that we don't know. So, can we talk a little bit about maybe the psychology of shame around finance and maybe why it is what it is?
Mhm. Absolutely. For me, my parents, I was lucky enough to grow up in a household where my parents stayed married. We were never wondering what we had to eat. But I grew up, I mean, I'm sure my parents will care sharing it, but they made our clothes for a while. And we had a family garden and they had built a house that was way too big for them. And they were what they call house poor, technically. So we didn't have a lot extra growing up. But my parents always taught me how to work hard. And they modeled to me how to be an entrepreneur. But I had to fill in all the blanks. But I didn't really get the stuff at the dinner table. It was like I overheard some stuff at night after I was upstairs, and it's usually probably about bills or saving and all these stresses that come with money, or living in a world where you feel like you need to compare yourself to everybody that's on Instagram. Like, look what I've got. Why don't you have that? And you should go have that right now. Why don't you? So I had to figure out a lot of this stuff out. So the shame is maybe if you feel like you're like left behind or getting behind. For me, my shame was I was just trying to get a business going. And when I graduated college, my parents, it's another story of the book. I have to go back to them a lot, but they gave me a card, a graduation card saying, we're proud of you for doing this. And by the way, you also need to start paying us back $400 next month in 2 weeks. Because I didn't know about loans. They'd been using some credit to be able to help me out. And that was my graduation gift. So maybe you could have waited a couple of weeks, but that was a pretty big moment. And then 2 weeks after that, Discover Card, they mailed me a card for a $20,000 credit limit. And that's more money than I had made all the way through odd jobs through college. And I didn't do anything fun running up credit card debt. I was literally just trying to stay in business. And I kept telling myself, like, you're only 1 month away from making it. You can make it. You can make it. Because I was taught to keep working hard. And if it doesn't happen, you can accumulate a ton of debt like I did, like $100,000 from age 18 to 25. Unfortunately, that's pretty normal now just for education debt. But there's a certain amount of shame. Like, how am I ever going to get out of this? Like, you just lose hope, I suppose, is what I did for a little bit. And then I had to figure out how to get out of it. And there's a great Warren Buffett quote, and he's generally accepted as the GOAT of investing. But he says, when you find yourself in a hole, stop digging. And you have to do that for yourself. And no one's coming to help you more than you. And so you got to get past the shame or not asking for help, right? Or learning. And so that's what I'm hoping to do with the book is share my shame that I went through. But the levels of it and getting where I'm at now are two different people. And I wish I would have known about debt when I was 18. I didn't think about it. It's just thrown at you and like, oh, you got your whole life, you can pay it back. You should be doing this. Living in a culture where it's over $100,000 for education. Oh, well, now you need to go get a car. So what are cars running? $60,000, $70,000 probably. Go get married. Oh, you should at least spend $50,000 on that. Or, I'm married to my beautiful wife for many years now, but I remember going in and they're like, you should be putting 3 months of your salary down for this. I'm like, what are you talking about?
The
Um,
ring.
the ring, right? And so I was lucky my wife settled for way less than that. And they're from Germany. They don't typically do anything over the top. But, my parents, they had cake and punch at the reception when they got married in the 70s. And then they went up to Niagara Falls. And when they ran out of money in 2 days, they drove home. Like, it's totally different than now. And then, of course, the big one that's a big, big problem is housing. And how do you even afford that right now? You're going into debt over your ears just to get in. And do you have enough to even put that as a deposit? So much to unpack there. But I wish I would have known about debt. And that's why the very first track of the book is called The Debt Row. It's like you feel like you're on death row. You can't get out of it. You're always going to be in it. You're a prisoner. How do you break free of that? That's why it's the longest chapter. And it's one where I'm in there telling about my stories. So that's
I
the shame
really
I feel.
enjoyed that. And I mean, it was a play on Death Row with Suge Knight and so on. And so when I was going through that chapter, I was like, man, if people get their relationship with money right prior to having a lot of money, they don't suffer what happened with, I think was in the next chapter, which was MC Hammer, right?
Yep. Made $72 million in 3 years. And I think to a certain extent, the celebrities that are out there surround themselves with yes people. and they don't have enough truth tellers. They don't have their best friends around them saying, you need to slow your roll and save some of this. What happens when the music stops, literally? But yeah, he got in over his ears really quickly. He was trying to do the right thing by employing about 200 of his friends and family, spending $500,000 to $1 million a month on payroll. And it's great when the money's coming in, but when the money dries up, I hope you saved ahead for a rainy day, and not when you're like buying a mansion, which was a respectable, I think, 3.5 million. He paid for it, but then he sunk another 30 million into it with gold toilets and hot tub and statues of himself. Like no one was saying, hey, maybe don't touch that hammer. But he says it's a good story. He's gone through it. He's actually successfully come back up, and he lives in a normal house, and he's having a pretty fulfilled life, I feel like, right now, from what I looked up on researching from everything.
So, like, what I find with people who actually get to the place of being able to sell their business and they get 7, 8, 9 figures is they're in one of two camps. It's either I need to get rid of this money as fast as I can because I don't deserve it, or I'm going to hoard all of it. And we talked about MC Hammer basically getting rid of all of it as quickly as he could, consumption. But I don't know that there's a whole lot of examples from an entertainment standpoint where they just hoard it. But I think in your practice, you probably see people who aren't actually enjoying the fruits of their labor. And so, as an advisor, it's probably in your best interest for them to keep it all because that's under management is usually how people get compensated in this industry. But what is your perspective on what I consider to be hoarding?
So it's a very interesting point. I think it's a difference in mindset because there's usually two mindsets. One is people that walk in here and haven't done anything for 30 years. And they're like, I don't have any problems. What do you mean I can't retire? I'm like, you have nothing saved. And then there's other people who have saved a ton because they've scrimped on certain things and they went without a luxury item for years to save ahead of time. And for them, it's this mental hurdle of, well, now you're telling me to spend this money? Doesn't compute. Like I'm not saving it anymore. So there's this sense of a fear of not saving. And I find that interesting. I'm like, you've done great. I'm showing you a plan. You're going to be forced to take money out at some point anyways. And if you want to do some estate planning and pass it along or go get some charitable giving, let's talk about that too. I'm a goal-based planner, and I'm not going to tell somebody not to do something if it's a goal of theirs and it makes sense and they've earned the right to do it. I want them to have a happy, fulfilled life. It's just, I've seen the two where somebody who has nothing thinks they're completely fine, and people who have a lot think that they're not good, but that's why they have something. I haven't met anybody in between there, but if they're hoarding, it's probably because they feel a little bit anxious about that, perhaps, about I'm losing what I've got. Like, I don't know how that feels. I've only been adding. All about balance, though, I believe.
Do you believe that people actually get fulfillment from seeing the number go up on the statement?
Oh, I know it. Yeah. Oh, yeah. People are very excited when everything's going up. And then I can't give them any reason or like at least talk to them why I feel like the market's gone up. And then when things go down, it's a drastically different picture. And I can't give enough reasons for why it might be happening that way. But that's why I preach as a certified financial planner, always have a plan to back up on. Write it down. I think there's some stat out there that you're more likely to do something if you write it down. It might be 70, 80% of the time. So write it down, have something written to go back to. And especially nowadays, I don't have room for politics and emotions inside these office walls when I'm doing a client meeting. If you're a long-term investor, you can leave that stuff at the door. It doesn't matter at all inside here. You have a plan. Do you have an emergency account? Is your spending okay? Your assets will work out over time. How do you get fulfillment out of life? So I've also had a lot of people that retire and then they don't have a plan for what's next, right? They don't know what to do. And so there's this whole emotional component about what makes you really happy now that you have earned the right to not have to work for a paycheck anymore. What makes you happy? What can you do to contribute? And the very last track of the book, I do straight out of compound. It's about compound interest, but also how you can compound your time and your blessings to give back and what's your legacy, right? Estate planning.
So let me go back because you said something that was very interesting for me. You said, I don't have room for space or time for politics if you're a long-term
And
investor.
emotions.
And
Yeah,
emotions.
and emotions.
If you're a
Yep.
long-term investor. I think a lot of people are really scared right now.
Mhm.
I think there is a lot of pain in the world. I think there's a lot of turmoil. I think there's a lot of uncertainty. And it's your perspective that over the long term, it's not going to matter a great deal. Is that fair?
My perspective is that we don't have control over that. There's certain things that you can control. And the only thing, and you can correct me, but I love this quote that I heard is that the only thing you have control of in life is how you react to what life throws at you. And so I try to put that into practice every day. where I don't know what's going to happen from day to day. I don't know what this person's going to do or that person's going to do, but I know that I can control my reaction. And so I've been trying to say, I think I've got it in the book, but the superpower that everybody possesses is patience. Obviously, have a plan to fall back on, but if you are letting yourself get played emotionally, tugged around all over the place, some of the worst money decisions are made when you allow emotions in. And I would say that plays from all kinds of things, politics included nowadays, everything, the internet, people getting advice from TikTok, people that aren't advisors or anything like this. Like you have to be able to control your emotions. It's not easy, but have a plan to fall back on and always be with the plan going through it. It's like anytime there's a market sell off, the only way that you lose is if you sell when something's down. So in order to not have to be forced to sell when it's down, did you even listen to me when we did a plan and I told you to have an emergency account? And I've dubbed this a bunch of things like life tax, a life tax account or an account. Did you have that? Because if you do, then that's the purpose right now is to use that money so you don't have to sell something that's down right now. And that's how we formulate a plan that's not bulletproof, but it's trying to have options and creating options for somebody. Because usually I go off of this quote from Mark Twain. It said, history doesn't rhyme or doesn't repeat, but it often rhymes. And so it might feel new. It might feel scary. It's probably happened before many, many times. You just weren't alive the last time it happened. It's a quote from Ray Dalio that he had talked about. And when my great grandmother was alive, she lived to be 103 and a half. And my goodness, she was using her like iPad. And at the end, she grew up through, she was born in 1919. So a year after Spanish flu, lived through that, lived through the Depression in her teenage years, lived through World War II, and you can go on and on and on, but only knew the struggle and kept adapting to it. And she always said, always do your best, always try your hardest, and always take that to heart. But so many things that she saw. So she had seen things that she didn't remember when she was young, but before she passed, she was saying the same things. Like, I've never seen anything like this before. I'm like, well, that's why I'd say if you live long enough, you see everything. So I tend to take the patient's perspective on everything. I try my best.
It's really fascinating. And I think it's wise. Right? I think a lot of folks are trying to make something happen. They're trying to force it. And whether it's jujitsu or Kabbalah or some other spiritual teaching that people are studying, you find that going with the flow is going to yield results with less pain than trying to impose your will on other people or other things. So when somebody gets a windfall and maybe they don't have the best relationship with money, what would you tell them to do?
So I did a video before because I have a TikTok channel, and it was, what do you do if you win the lottery? And it did pretty good with people. Step one, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anybody. Go talk to somebody that understands money. And sometimes that's setting up a trust. So you can go and make sure that no one finds out your name, because as soon as they find out, what do you think is going to happen? The third step was write down a list of everybody you think that's going to call you and put their name in a column A and do B and C, like do have a yes and then a no that you can check off. Step 4 was you call each person and you say, I've fallen on hard times. Can you loan me X amount of dollars, $1,000 or $5,000? And if they say yes, it's a yes column. If it's no. And then the last step, when they inevitably find out that you've got this windfall of money, that's a no. You can revert back to it, right? You wanted my help now, but I needed help then. Theoretically, I was testing you. So if there is a windfall of money, it's probably take a pause. Don't go blow everything right away. Think it through. If you don't have somebody around you, it's really a wise thing to surround yourself with people that understand, that you can trust, whether that's even a family member. Or I learned a lot of what I learned from my first job, which is in a grocery store. And it was ran by a shorter Italian guy. And man, he had it under his grip the whole time. And I found myself asking him questions before I left home. I was working for him from 16, 17 years old. And I thought he was doing well. And I remember the day I left before university, he's like, hey, I want you to take this chair from one millionaire to the next. I'm like, oh, I had no idea how he was doing, but he was always a good source of quick-witted advice to me. And I watched how he did things and how he ran things and what made him tick. And I asked him questions. And so if anybody's getting a windfall, take a time out, go find the right people to get advice from, make a plan. And I think that's just having a pause, right? Have a pause moment before you do anything with it. And think about what money is. And if you think it's a bridge to just buy luxuries or whatever you want to try to fill yourself up with, I think you need to find out what really fulfills you. And that's a better place to start at. I'm sure people have gone out and bought a bunch of stuff before, and some of the rappers in the books definitely did. But what really fulfill you, that's a deeper question that you got to find an answer to. Money doesn't fix things, it just amplifies it, I feel like. That's another quote that's out there. So if you have problems, it's going to amplify your problems. Fix your problems first.
So there's a chapter in the book called More Money, More Problems. Is that
Yep. Thank you,
true?
BIG.
More money, more problems?
So I used 50 Cent as an example. I think the general answer to what you're asking is if you are surrounded by yes people and you're the meal ticket and you get the wrong people around you, you might be making more, but you're creating more problems unless you have your problems sorted out and you're in a different headspace than dumping a bunch of money on it. But 50 came up and you could read about more of his story, but everybody knows him from Into Club. And I think after that tour, he made $37 million. He goes from living in an $800 a month rent, like apartment with his son, to going and buying the Mike Tyson mansion for, I don't know, $4 to $5 million. Buys it outright. What he fails to understand is that a house can own you. You think you own the house, but the house can own you. So his upkeep, man, the upkeep on all this asset, you can look at it as an asset, was close to $1 million a year. And 50 went on after to make 37 million. I don't know if that's after tax or before. He went on, and if anybody remembers, 50 hit it big with vitamin water. He did Formula 50. And it was a really genius move because he decided instead of getting paid his commercial money, like give me a fee for promoting a product, he's like, I want equity. And that was genius. And so he got like a 10% stake in the company, I believe. So his after-tax earnings from when Coca-Cola bought it, almost a year after he got into it, he took home like $100 million from that. One genius move. And that's some real good business acumen and wisdom right there. And then he gets a Reebok commercial. And then it's great when the money's coming in. And all the while, there's this asset, this home that's there, and it's just bleeding him out like $1 million a year in upkeep and all the other things he was spending money on. And lawsuits, as we were talking about before we started, I watch the 50 News Network now, and he doesn't hold anything back typically. But there's a moment in there where him and Rick Ross had been feuding for a while, and I'm sure they still are. He released a video of Rick Ross's ex-girlfriend. He gets sued. That's after a bunch of other bad decisions, like trying to create Beats by Dre headphones, but his version of them, and it was a bad investment, and he lost everything. And then the final nail in the coffin is he gets sued, and in order to pay her less money, he declares bankruptcy, essentially. He would say it's other reasons to restructure debt. He went from 470 million down to about $30 million. And then he ends up having to lose his house, loses his rear end on it. So all in, he probably paid closer to $16, $18 million if you're counting upkeep and taxes and then like the insurance on there. And then he ends up selling it at a fire sale. And the curious thing about all that is, and you're talking about how do you understand money if you've never been taught it? The exact same thing just about happened to Mike Tyson before that, because Mike had made almost $500 million and he just blew it all. So it's interesting that the same thing happened for both of the owners of that house. So I don't know who owns it now, but I hope they made better decisions third time around.
Yeah. So can you really call it an asset if it's draining?
A lot of people think it is. If you have an appreciating asset, but it needs to appreciate more than it's draining, right? It needs to be going up in value more than what you're losing out of your pants every day. So, yeah.
And so that takes us to back your assets up. Talk to me about this chapter, Drew.
This chapter goes over the absolute most boring part of my job and where most people just their eyes glaze over and fall asleep. And so I'm talking taxes, which are super important. I'm talking legal stuff, which is super important. And then insurances, which is super important. And so I knew that I had to come up with I had to really stretch on a catchy title. Thank you, Juvenile. It was back a thing. And try to go through this and try to make it as exciting as I could, as you can with these subjects. And so I'm trying to go through where there's situations where, for taxes, it was Lil Wayne who was out having a great time on tour, I'm sure, for a couple of years. And I don't know the whole backstory, but he finds out that the IRS puts a lien on his house. Like he owed a lot of money. Can't quote it right now, but it's 17 million maybe in back taxes. So A, he was either not paying taxes, which means he didn't have an accountant. And B, he's probably out having a good time. Like, listen to his songs. He's doing his thing. Wakes up, gets a lien put against him. So if you don't pay it, you're going to lose your house. And so luckily he had an Uncle Sean come in, and it's Jay-Z who came in, and basically there's no real, he got a shout out at a concert once before. Little John shouted out Jay-Z saying, hey, my brother came in and helped me out on this. So all I know is the lien went away. So I'm assuming he paid it off for him. That's the assumption on them. There's other stories that unfortunately in hip hop, there's all too many untimely deaths that happen. And growing up in the mid 90s, I mean, I remember we had like the Dead Poet Society, right? It was Tupac and Biggie. And the war of words and what ended up with that. Tupac never had a will. He only had one. He didn't have any children. He was never married. So his estate went to his mother, but it goes through probate court. He ended up only having like about $200,000. But I remember him rhyming about him being a millionaire. And in actuality, he wasn't. I don't know if he knew that or not, but he did it. And so there's all kinds of great stories. So I looked up a few rappers that have gone too early and like who had a will, who didn't have a will. So that's pretty interesting there. Mac Miller was somebody like he's pretty famous from Pittsburgh, the rapper. And I didn't realize he was a multi-instrumentalist as well and wrote a lot of his stuff. Should check out his Tiny Desk. It's pretty good on NPR. But somebody had spoke to him and Mac ended up dying from a drug overdose. But his parents wisely at maybe I think around 21, 22, they had set up a regular will for him. And so his estate went to his parents. And I go in opposite of that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was Takeoff from Migos. He'd been in I believe it was a craps game, and he got shot in an argument and died. His estate was worth $28 million. And so he was raised by his mom only, and his dad wasn't in the picture. And because he had no will, his estate he lives a resident of Georgia. And so his estate went through the probate court in Georgia. And I don't know if it's been settled yet, but at the time that I was writing about it, it was basically to go 50-50 to his mom and then his dad that was never there. And I'm sure that if he could have said that again, if had his own say in it, I'm pretty sure it would have gone on to his mom, right? She raised them, she took care of them, probably didn't want to have his dad come in and get half. But if you don't take the time to write these things down, the court's going to figure out for you what they feel is fair and just. And for the cost of $1,000 or $500 for a will, or if you need to do a trust like he would have, that's a few $1,000, but that's infinitely cheaper than not having one. It's just making it easier on the rest of your family members. So there's other stories in there about Bob Marley. He intentionally didn't have a will, or it was against his religion. And he just said, I want you all to know who's about money and who's not when I'm not here. He notoriously always gave away money when he was alive and helped out everybody he could. He's like, I want you to see the true character of, so to speak, the vultures that come in after I'm gone, because you'll know who they are, their character played out that way. So that's that chapter.
Well, so I mean that part's really interesting, and I think it's a great place to wrap up the episode because so I think what he did was irresponsible. And I mean it's not really for me to place judgment or on this, but when you think about what was created and now you just want to leave it to prove a point instead of being what I consider to be a great steward of the resources that were placed under his management, I think you set up a situation for chaos, and that chaos proves what I don't know to what end or what point is proven by that. And if they take the resources, the people that maybe you wanted to have the resources don't have them. So how do you feel? Well, maybe it's not how do you feel. I guess if somebody comes to you and they're thinking about end of life and transferring of assets, what guidance do you give them for that? Do you tell them just to leave it be, or is there a kind of structured process for how to make sure things go to whatever place that they want them to go?
Yeah, great question. I try to put them in the place of who is about ready to receive this. A good question is like, do you enjoy paying taxes? No one says yes on that. Do you want a court to decide for you what you've created, right? Do you want that dictated by somebody that had no say at the beginning, or do you want to be able to have some control? You don't want chaos. And if you want to leave your resources to a charity, wouldn't it be nicer if you just list them down as a beneficiary? That's what we go through titling. As a CFP, I look at a lot of stuff. I can't give tax advice, but I can do tax planning. I can't give legal advice, but we do legal planning and estate planning, right? So we try to take a very holistic view of going through everybody's accounts. Like, is this titled correctly, whether it's under our management or not? It has nothing to do with us. We're trying to make it as seamless as possible and that you understand the process. We're all going to die at some point. Do you want to sit back and wait to see when that happens, or do you want to be proactive, set your assets up in the way that you want to see them go to somebody in the least amount of possible, and pay your fair share of taxes, but not get caught up for 6 months to a year in a court system in order to see who gets what. So I think people mainly would choose control over chaos. So Bob's probably not the greatest example, but that's just what he decided to do. But I do my darndest to make sure that the clients are aware. I'm a financial advisor. It's not a financial dictator. I give you advice. I can throw up an idea to you. Whether or not you do it, I will keep asking if you've done it, but I can't make you go do something. I can only let you know what's going to happen if you don't do that. So we always have like a roadmap that we're constantly trying to follow. And instead of running over a pothole, why don't we fill it in ahead of time?
I love it, Drew. I love it, man. And I think that statement really drives the point home. Nobody can do it for you. The best advice is worthless if you're not willing to take action on it. And having a great advisor on your team to give you the strategy you need in order to create the outcome you want still requires you to be a partner in the creation of that. And so, man, I'd like to spend maybe a couple of more minutes in the episode and just think about or have you share what is the one thing you want the listeners to take away from this episode.
I want everybody to get some basic knowledge in financial education. That's the very first step. Take the first step and just get started. A lot of people choose not to do this for a long period of time, make a mistake, continue to make the same mistake. And it's just, I don't know the mentality. It's just easier not to do anything different, or it might be scary to learn something new. Be open to learning new things and stay curious and ask questions. And if you don't understand something, there's nothing shameful in going and asking somebody, saying, I don't actually know how a credit card works. What's the credit score? The basics. Why should I have a will? If I have my own business, did you say that I could hire my children on there as minors and I can save money in there and they don't pay taxes? A lot of things out there that people don't know, and they profit off of your uneducation, right? The miseducation that's, or the lack of that's even happening out there for financial anything. So start with financial education and just learn it piece by piece. And I guess secondarily, unplug yourself from this culture of, I want that, or I want this consumer-based economy where it's ran by Instagram, everything. Well, that person has that. I deserve that too. I need to go get those. I need to get that. The only person you should ever compare yourself is you 1 year ago. Stop comparing yourself to everybody else.